Greetings, dear friends. Operational situation at the front and news for the 29th of January. We will start with you according to the tradition of the Skupsko-Limansky direction, and we will finish with a news background. In the area of Sinkovka, without any significant changes in the positional nature of the fighting, north of Sinkovka and west of Sinkovka. It means that there is more, as we have already said on previous broadcasts. Russian troops rely on small infantry groups, not so much on armored vehicles as in previous periods, but still activity remains quite high. Especially we are talking about the forest area south of the first estuary, where Russian troops are making further attempts to advance in the southern direction, and accordingly, prepare the ground for a flank attack on Sinkovka. Therefore, active military operations remain within the gray zone. As for Avdeevka, it means there are two messages. The first message from our side is that the Russian troops failed to take the entire settlement. But there are some conventions here, we will talk about them further. So there was a counterattack. It was possible to knock out Russian troops from a number of positions, which corresponds to reality about the fact that they rolled back to the eastern part of the settlement. There is such a moment. At the same time, the second statement from the Russian side is an official statement from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation that they have completely taken control of Avdeevka, but it was made today and not the day before yesterday, when there were reports from the Russian side from their fighters, or yesterday. It means that this is why the situation remains under clarification today. The only thing is that we corrected the situation under Avdeevka. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today, added more gray area. But, I said there is some convention. The convention actually lies in the fact that Avdeevka is one building, and a second building, and actually, well, the ruins of another third building. And on this point, as it were, there are geographical boundaries defined by its settlement, but these are all trees and land. That is, there is such a convention here. The name on the map, yes. And 3 ruins left from the houses. Therefore, the fighting continues, active. The Russian troops are attacking as in Avdeevka itself, attempting to move across the river. It passes through our center, respectively, to move to the western part, also to move from the pike beam to its western part, that is, the eastern part is under their control, and there are attacks in the western direction within the gray zone. Well, also in the area of Starch, there are a number of attempts recorded by Russian troops, again with small infantry groups, to advance along the forest belts, including the beam in the western direction to the Sandy Stavka. We do not record any new changes in this sector of the front. Moving on, I will comment on one point in the Lyman direction. So, yesterday, there was a lot of news by the end of the day, and, in principle, today there is also that the Russian troops are pressing, but they have changed the auto vector, not to Thorns, but to Yampolovka, and we have active hostilities from Yar Laptev to Yar Dalny, including Yar Near. This information corresponds to reality, because first of all, drone footage was published where Russian troops are attacking, and the defense forces are repelling this attack, so it is possible to restrain Russian troops today, but the vector of their attacks is really shifting from the round beam to 3 tiers. Therefore, active hostilities continue through the Serebryansky forest without any changes. Today, footage from the Russian troops was published, but everything remains within the control zone of the Ifu, the red and gray zones. Seversk direction without any changes in the Bakhmut direction. I will comment on a few points here. The first one is of course Bogdanovka. Active offensive actions by the Russian troops are continuing. We are not only talking about Bogdanovka itself, we are also talking about the northern flank, where the Russian infantry remains quite active. And we once said a few weeks ago that for the Russian troops, the main goal remains the forest plantation north of Bogdanovka, after the capture of which they will definitely try to attack Bogdanovka itself with larger forces. Therefore, we observe the positional nature of the fighting in Bogdanovka, and the main bet on the part of the enemy infantry is on this forest plantation. As before, I was on the Popovsky forest, behind the cemetery, west of Kromov. We did not record any changes in this area. So we switched to the Avdeevka direction immediately, experienced. There are no changes in other sections of the front. Under the experienced, information was received that the APU retreated to more advantageous positions, because there are a number of natural difficulties. The enemy, as you know, is attacking, and we said that they would attack from an experienced one, because they somehow even voiced the moment that they would try to strike from two directions. And we talked about it yesterday with you. There is a garden partnership on which a bet is being made, because there are attacks in the western direction from the Tsarskaya Okhoda complex, and they will try to bypass the Zenit and Chebarashka air defense fortifications. To do this, there will be the greatest activity from the experimental area. Today, we see this, and the situation for yesterday, the situation for today. There is a section of the front of the order of a little more than 1 kilometer, a red zone has been added, and accordingly, Russian troops are already present in this area, within the forest belts, naturally within the T-shaped intersections of their troops. As for the south of Avdeevka, it is in this context that we will continue to consider it now. So the Russian troops, as you remember, are attacking, and there are heavy battles, shooting battles, urban type of combat along several streets in the south of Avdeevka, in the area of the so-called Old Avdeevka, also in the area of Tsarskaya Okhoda, and within the gray zone. The Russian troops are also trying to advance along the railway in the western direction, in the direction of the Garden Association, which runs along the T0505 road, so there are very heavy battles going on here, but the situation, let's say as it is dynamic. That is, they fail to gain a foothold, and moreover, we see that the APU regularly counterattacks them in a number of positions, preventing videoactive hostilities from naturally gaining a foothold. Therefore, the situation is very complex and dynamic. To date, we do not record any new changes on the part of the Russian troops, but unfortunately it is not possible to drink them from a number of positions. We were asked to comment on the royal hunt in more detail because there are a number of statements that it is in the gray zone. Look, in any case, I have no visual confirmation of this. It seems to me that if we manage to knock them out, it would really demoralize. If you show the same pictures as they are, for example, in starch, they are shown with the hoisting of the flag, yes, or just on the territory. It seems to me that this would play a significant role in this sector of the front, because they have already had a number of difficulties, as we see in this sector. Although again, they have enough reserves, but in terms of promotion, they managed to stop them. Naturally, such pictures would be taken, they hit them. I'm not saying that they would have turned to flee, but believe me, it would have affected their morale. But unfortunately today there are none. Therefore, I have no information that Russian troops were dislodged from this sector of the front. There will be official information, of course we will color it. There will be visual confirmations, we will repaint. But today here is the information. As for the northern flank of Avdeevka, we do not record any significant changes. The main fighting is taking place south of Veseloy, within the gray zone, within several forest strips, but also in the Stepovoy area. And as I wrote in my telegram in the morning summary, along the northern railway, there was not only an attack from Russian troops in this area, as we talked about yesterday, but there was also a counterattack from the AFU, so they were not allowed to gain a foothold, so here without any changes. Both from our side the footage was published, and from the enemy. No fixed changes have been published. And the main bet now, I must say, is just the same, in the direction of the sand quarry. Not so much the step will be on the part of the Russian troops, and of course the Grey Zone, and the Oak Grove Garden Association. And then, if the Russian troops manage to gain a foothold, then along Sportivnaya, Chernyshevskaya, Sobornaya streets, conditionally up to their intersections of these streets, they naturally come across a garden partnership, and also attack from an experienced one in an easterly direction, northeast, in order to bypass a number of fairly strong positions that they failed to take. We turn to May Day. We celebrated the previous days with you on this sector of the enemy's advance front. I then commented that we were based on the geolinking of drone footage that was published. Well, he said that the situation along Voroshilev Street remains for clarification. To date, an adjustment has already come, clarifications on May Day. It means that the Dacha village has completely come under the control of the enemy, and further progress along Voroshilev Street. We have said that approximately this square on previous broadcasts. Yesterday we said, the day before yesterday remains to be clarified. Well, today there is a clarification. Here, the enemy advanced on a front section up to 500 meters wide, to a depth of 280 meters. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today. But let's say this is a bigger clarification, but unfortunately, yes, the enemy managed to advance. And of course, there is some activity with the Izmailovsky Stavka, that is, the further goal is to advance along Voroshilev Street, with a call to Persha Travneva Street. In other words, two Russian groups, including WAV operators, who are located approximately in this area, in one of the fortified areas, will join here and try to align the front, not further advance along Pervomaysky, namely, leveling the front, because there is some concentration of Russian troops approximately in this area, and most likely the vector of their strike will not be Nevelskaya, namely in the north direction, that is, to align the front line along one of the forest belts and try to gain a foothold in it naturally. And then, if we are talking about a completely pessimistic scenario, a long-term, average term, a long-term, that we would try on May Day. But we will look at it according to the situation. So today this is the situation we have in this sector of the front. Moving on. Kharkiv direction. We do not record any changes. There are active hostilities in the eastern part of Georgievka, but it is possible to restrain these small infantry groups. And recently, we have been talking about attacks by Russian troops on the Zverinets fortified area. This is the South Donetsk direction. Yesterday, we analyzed the footage on the daytime broadcast, where the binding is, so we attacked the northern fortified menagerie. A few days ago, we commented that they carried out attacks south of the menagerie fortified area. And in fact, they talked about the fact that they would try to circumvent it. And today, we already have a clarification on the information on this sector of the front. The situation for yesterday and the situation for today. It was possible to advance 1 and 3 kilometers wide of the front. This means that active fighting continues along several T-shaped intersections in the western direction, in the direction of another fortified area, the capture of which opens up potential opportunities for Russian troops to strike from the north in the southern direction. And naturally, these are attacks in the direction of Novomikhailivka, only from the northern flank. The Garden Association Mashinostroidal, located to the north, behind the Novomikhailovsky machine, that is, already to the north of it, and Poroskoviivka. I once published at home in December, and today in my telegram, I published briefly how the situation can develop here, with reference to my December forecast. That is how we see the development of the situation here. And just the same, yes, the vector of their attacks will most likely be the Garden Partnership and Poroskoviivka subsequently. In order to take partial fire control of the road section Konstantinovka-Novomikhailivka, because south of Novomikhailivka, as originally predicted back in December, they failed to advance. But we then said that the vectors the attack will most likely be directed at the section of the Konstantinovka-Novomikhailivka road. And yes, they refused plans in the direction of Vodien to the highway, about 0532, and the main blow is still on the road section, as I predicted, let's say so. Therefore, there is a difficult situation here. I will say it directly, it remains, because they are not going to naturally abandon the offensive on Novomikhailivka, they are only implementing a slightly different tactic, namely the tactics of exhaustion. That is, not frontal assaults, as it was supposed before, namely, bypassing and taking under partial fire control of a road section as far as possible. But again, we are considering the most pessimistic scenario at the moment. The Novoselkov direction is great. I will also comment on one point here. Shots were published from the enemy north of the shelter. He went on the attack in the direction of the forest plantation north of the shelter. Well, accordingly, a gray zone has been added there, because the enemy entered approximately this area, that is, beyond the gray zone, west of the gray zone, into the forest plantation itself, according to the footage from their drones. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today. There is a minimal adjustment of the gray zone, but as we can see, the enemy is also active in this area of the front. Before, as you remember, he attacked in the direction of Staromayorsky. Then there were attacks in the direction of Harvest already this year, and now north of Priutny, let's say Novodarovka, is attacking in this direction. Well, again, this is a convention, because its main purpose, as you remember, is to align the front line along the beam. This was his goal back in the autumn of the 23rd year. He could not realize it. He managed to repel a sufficiently large number of attacks. But today, we see that these attempts are being resumed. It was very important to comment on this moment, because we will move on to the news background. And this moment is very important in the context of all the attacks that exist. So, in the Orekhovsky direction, and to the markets, without any